Let's go back to where the main event happens, in the palace of the Magentano Kingdom, where the queen resides. Queen Alicia brought Javier to her private office to speak with him alone. She told Javier that she hopes Sir Asrahan will be honest with her this time. Queen Alicia asked Javier if the revelation from the angel who appeared was related to Lloyd, and if he was the one behind it. Javier confirmed that Lloyd was indeed responsible, even though he himself orchestrated everything. However, as he is now Lloyd Frontera, he felt it was simpler to agree to it. Queen Alicia sighed, noting how quickly Javier responded. She then asked if he was finally ending this act. Javier explained that his surprise was only an act to avoid raising suspicions among the queen's vassals. He admitted that he knew his performance would never deceive her. The queen, reflecting on the past, remarked that Javier's attempt to flatter her reminded her of Lloyd. Queen Alicia added that, at least, he didn't stick his butt up like Lloyd did. Looking down and somewhat dejected, Javier admitted he couldn't bring himself to do something so disgraceful. Queen Alicia, with the same empty expression, agreed with what Javier said, adding that it was such an annoying sight, when in the past, she had wanted to slap Lloyd's butt and was tempted to do so in the end. Javier then clarified that, while that might have been his master Lloyd's plan, the angel was indeed real. Queen Alicia agreed, commenting on how much the angel truly seemed divine. Javier asked if she doubted the angel's identity. Queen Alicia replied that Lloyd was skilled enough to deceive even the founding divine dragon of their kingdom. However, there was still a question the queen wanted answered. She told Javier they needed to get down to business and asked why he needed the Eye of the Summer. Javier fell silent, unsure of how to explain. Then, with a serious expression, he told the queen that his master Lloyd was dying. This revelation shocked Queen Alicia. Back at the Frontera estate, the maidservant Emily and Lloyd's mother, Countess Marbella Frontera, visited Lloyd's room. Emily called out to Master Lloyd, informing him that she had brought some food. Lloyd thanked her but instructed her to leave it outside his room. Emily, unsure, mentioned that she needed to clean up the plates and utensils from the previous day. Lloyd reassured her that he would clean them himself and said he was busy. Seeing his consistent response, Emily looked to the Countess, who nodded in agreement. Both of them seemed worried about Lloyd. Following his instructions, Emily left the food outside his door and told Lloyd to let her know if he needed anything. Lloyd thanked her. Lloyd waited until he could no longer hear them nearby. When he was certain they had left, he slowly opened the door and took the food inside. Inside his room, there were untouched food and drinks from previous days. Lloyd remained the same, a man who was dying, having lost all hope to live. He could only sigh, his lips dry from days of dehydration and starvation. Meanwhile, back in Magentano Castle, the queen asked Javier about the restoration phenomenon of fate he had mentioned. Javier explained that it was the phenomenon Verkis, the king of dragons and son of Tyrannus, the founding divine dragon, had told them about. He said that all the fates altered by Lloyd's powers were trying to revert to their original paths. Verkis had also informed them that they needed the truth jewel to prevent this from happening. After hearing that, the queen thought it all made sense. Since the attack of the Gigantitan group and the uprising of Isfahan, Lloyd had been the one who stopped both. Her eyes began to widen as she considered the worst possibilities. She started to question if everything was really trying to return to its original state. Back where Lloyd was, he lay on the floor near his door, his room dark as though he had isolated himself from the outside world. All of his Pokémon began appearing, looking at their master, clearly worried about his situation. Podong, his first Pokémon and the one who had been with him the longest, hugged his master. Then, the system's window appeared, catching Podong's attention. The system window showed him an image of the Count and the Countess. Podong seemed to understand the message the system was trying to convey, and he strengthened his resolve. Podong, Bibiong, and Bengal started pulling at Lloyd, trying to get him to move. Perhaps Podong was asking him to go to the Count. Lloyd apologized to them, saying he was a little tired and couldn't take them all for a walk right now. Hamang tapped Lloyd's shoulder, and Goming started biting his ear, insisting he come with them. Lloyd was eventually forced to follow, as all of his Pokémon encouraged him to move. Lloyd said he didn't want his little guys to stay cooped up in his dark room, so he slowly walked with them. Lloyd slowly walks with them. Lloyd calls to them and tells them that where they are going is the upper floor, and the only room there is the Count's room. But without even letting him finish his sentence, his sensitive senses as a swordmaster start to act up. he hears the Countess's voice. Countess Marbella says that Lloyd is not just overthinking some problem and that his health is definitely in poor condition. For Lloyd, it was unmistakably the Countess's voice. Even as he tried to shut off his swordmaster senses, he could still hear everything at that distance. Lloyd stood still, listening to their conversation. The Countess asked the Count if he had already noticed. She mentioned that Javier had told them Lloyd was merely resting, but she added that Javier was terrible at lying. The Count agreed, saying Javier had acted similarly before. He recalled that Javier had once explained Lloyd's different behavior by saying he had hit his head. The Count said they already knew Javier was lying and that he was doing it for the sake of the person who had taken on Lloyd's appearance. Hearing that both the Count and Countess already knew he was not the real Lloyd shocked the current Lloyd, or Kim Suho. He felt pain in his heart, unable to process the information he had just overheard. He began panting heavily. The Count remarked that the fact Javier was going to such lengths to protect the person within Lloyd meant the current Lloyd was doing his best for them. Countess Marbella agreed with her husband, adding that the man must definitely not be a bad person. She told her husband they needed to wait a little longer. With a hopeful expression, the Countess said that once the person behind Lloyd recovered and prevented all misfortunes for their county, she was sure Lloyd would come and tell them the truth. The Count agreed, saying he believed Lloyd would do that too. Hearing this conversation, Lloyd ran. He sprinted away from the room as fast as he could. The space around him seemed to narrow as he pushed himself to run faster. At last, he reached his room and slammed the door open. He pulled down the long curtains that had covered the room in darkness and began folding them away. To Lloyd, he knew he had to live on. He needed to survive for the sake of others. He started eating the untouched food that had been left in his room. The room began to brighten once again as Lloyd regained his hope to live on. He started fixing everything and ate the food that was sent to him. His very pale complexion slowly changed. For him, he had to keep living so he could one day tell them the truth with his head held high. Back in the Magentano kingdom, the queen told Javier that she now understood the situation. Queen Alicia acknowledged that, since it would be impossible to convince the vassals with such an unbelievable story, Javier must have used an angel's revelation. Queen Alicia agreed with Javier's decision. She pointed out that the remaining issue was how to resolve the conflict between those who believed in the revelation and those who did not. Javier closed his eyes, unable to think of a solution. He apologized to the queen, saying that only one person could come up with an answer to that problem. Queen Alicia understood that he was referring to the person who was currently dying due to the winter heart and had lost all energy to fight. She told Javier that only Lloyd Frontera could stop the restoration phenomenon of fate. She said they needed to help him get back on his feet to stop all the changes happening in their kingdom. Javier listened silently as the queen spoke. A smile crossed the queen's face, as if an idea had come to her. An unpredictable husband and a wife who can control that lazy husband must be about to form this time, hoping that the child's face will take after Queen Alicia. Smiling elegantly, she said that helping capable people was her specialty. Javier smiled, reassured by her confidence. Meanwhile, Lloyd began meditating to calm his mind. His heart, still affected by the winter heart, caused him to breathe heavily. Lloyd knew he had to start by addressing his depression. He thought about his first step and realized he needed to stop isolating himself, seek help, and accept it. Looking at his loyal Pokemon, he wanted to thank them for cheering him up. Lloyd began with small actions, tidying his room and taking a bath. He tried to come up with a plan, but nothing concrete emerged. Still, he knew he needed to survive first. He resolved to live on and find a way to fight fate, setting his sights on obtaining the Eye of Summer. Lloyd gritted his teeth, determined to overcome the negative thoughts telling him he would fail. He knew he had to shake them off and keep going. Suddenly, someone arrived at the Frontera estate, Yang Yang, Lloyd's adoptive son and a bone dragon. Lloyd felt Yang Yang's presence and looked toward it. Javier, meanwhile, bowed in the presence of the Count and informed him of an important guest. He asked the Count and Countess to step outside for a moment. The Count complied, wondering who this guest might be. As they walked outside, they were awestruck by what they saw, a woman with beautiful, flowing hair, wearing a stunning dress with an embedded flower and bearing the grace of a noble lady. She told the Count that she has only heard his name, as this is their first meeting. She told them that she is engaged to his son, Lloyd Frontera. She bowed down and introduced herself as Alicia Termina Magentano. The Count and the Countess were silent for a moment as the reality of Alicia's presence didn't sink in. Who would have thought that the guy who was always rejected because of his mythical, ugly face could have a fiancée? But when the thought sank in that their son was truly engaged, not to an ordinary lady but to the wise queen, both of them were shocked, beginning to sweat and turn pale. The Count starts panicking upon hearing the family name of Queen Alicia. Both of them bow down, and Countess Marbella offers her greetings to Her Majesty. The Queen begins fixing her hair and says there's no need to be so formal, as she is someone who will become their daughter-in-law. After all, Queen Alicia, a swordmaster, senses where Lloyd is. She looks in his direction, strikes a beautiful pose, and asks Lloyd if he agrees with what she said, then starts calling him her future husband. Damn, the ship is already sailing so fast. Lloyd still looks depressed since he just recovered from that dark state and only recently managed to regain his hope to live. But as the thought sinks in that the Queen herself came to their territory and introduced herself as his future bride, Lloyd is shocked. His eyes widen, and he starts sweating, asking what the Queen just said. This will be the greatest wedding in the Manhwa verse.